Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. The apocalypse, or end of the world, described in the Old Norse sources as Ragnarok, is one of the most compelling and famous stories of the end of the world that is known from any mythology. Our sources for the myth of Ragnarok are the same as our sources for most Norse myths, primarily two books called Edda, written in Iceland in the 1200s. The Poetic Edda is a compilation of poems that were originally composed for the most part hundreds of years before, and then transmitted orally till they were written down in this compilation manuscript in the 1200s. There is also the Prose Edda, which is the work of a single author, Snorri Sturluson. Snorri knew the poems of the Poetic Edda, perhaps orally, not in the written form we have them today, and draws on them heavily in writing his Prose Edda, but also adds some details that are not in the Poetic Edda, perhaps because they're from poems that are lost to us today. These two books are often confused, but we have to remember that the Poetic Edda is a more primary source than the Prose Edda, because Snorri is often trying to interpret the same poems that we're trying to interpret from the Poetic Edda. In the Poetic Edda, the poems that tell us the most about Ragnarok are Völuspá. This is the poem about the beginning and end of the world. It has the most complete version of the myth of Ragnarok. There's also Vafthrudnismal, in which Odin is engaged in a wisdom contest with a giant, and part of the wisdom or trivia that they exchange concerns Ragnarok. And a little bit from the poem called Lokasenna, in which Loki makes fun of the different gods and goddesses, because some of what he makes fun of them for is what's going to happen to them in Ragnarok. Outside of the main manuscript that constitutes what we call the Poetic Edda, the manuscript called the Codex Regius, there are other poems or versions of poems that tell us a little bit. There's Völuspá in Skama, the short Völuspá, which is from a manuscript called Flateyjarbók. This is usually included in translations of the Poetic Edda, though. It's included, for instance, in my translation of the Poetic Edda. And then there's also another version of Völuspá, which comes from the manuscript called Hauksbók, which is some decades later than the Codex Regius. This has some extra stanzas that aren't in the main version of Völuspá and Codex Regius, and that don't add significantly to our understanding of what happens at Ragnarok. There's also the two poems called Eriksmal and Håkonarmal, which are composed in memory of dead Viking kings that portray them entering Valhalla. These give us a little bit of information about Ragnarok, mostly in that they provide Odin's motivation for collecting all of the dead warriors that he does on human battlefields. He wants them to come help him fight at Ragnarok. There's also artistic pieces of evidence for this. One of the most interesting is something called the Gosforth Cross, which actually comes from England, in a part of northern England where Norse and English culture overlapped, intersected. It has scenes that appear to be both from the Christian Revelation and from the Norse Ragnarok. Now, the word itself, Ragnarok, we see in two different forms in the Eddas. And these two different forms end up having two different interpretations. The word Ragnarok is a compound word, and the part Ragna is easy to understand. It's just the genitive plural or possessive plural of the gods. So this is something belonging to the gods, of the gods. But in the form that we mostly see this word in the Poetic Edda, Ragnarok, Rok is events, fates, destinies. So this would be then events of the gods, destiny of the gods, fates of the gods. But Snorri uses a slightly different looking word. He uses Ragnarökr, and that also appears one time in the Poetic Edda in the poem Lokasenna, and that would then mean twilight of the gods. So even though today we mostly use the form of the word in English that's derived from the Poetic Edda's version, the meaning that most people will give it is the meaning that's in Snorri, the twilight of the gods. And of course it's what Wagner uses in Götterdämmerung, right, the twilight of the gods. So what exactly happens at Ragnarok? First of all, there are certain portents or warnings. Völuspá tells us that a rooster will crow in each of the three worlds where the supernatural beings of Norse myth live. One in Osgarður, where the gods live, one in Jotunheimr, where the giants live, and one in Hell, the world of the dead below. In Hell, a dog named Garmr will break loose from its chains. Now, it seems Garmr might be the same as Fenrir, the giant wolf that's going to kill Odin. In the Poetic Edda, it's difficult to tell the difference between these two dogs or wolves. But Snorri in the Prose Edda insists that Garmr is a different being and that he has a different battle than Fenrir has at Ragnarok. The sun will turn black. Snorri adds that there will be an earthquake, and the god Heimdallr will blow his Gjallarhorn, literally something like yeller horn. This is the horn that he blows to warn the gods that Ragnarok is upon them. A great ship will be launched from Jotunheim, the world of the giants, carrying giants and monsters aboard it. And Loki, having escaped from his chains, is going to be the captain of that ship. The ship is called Naglfar, and Nagl means nail, either fingernail or nail like in a plank. So the word has the same ambiguity as English nail. So it's unclear what this should be. Far is just vessel, vehicle. So is this nail vehicle like hammer nail, or is this nail like fingernail vehicle? In the Poetic Edda it's not clear, but Snorri in the Prose Edda clarifies that it is in fact fingernail vehicle, that this ship is actually made from the untrimmed fingernails of dead men. So that if you want to assist the gods at Ragnarok, you need to trim your nails so that they don't get too long and they're not untrimmed when you die. According to the poem Vafþrúð the Small, there will now be Fimbulvetr. Vetr means winter, Fimbul means monstrous, terrible, so a terrible winter. Snorri specifies that this is 3 winters all together with no summer in between, i.e. 3 years of solid winter. And among human beings, there will be particularly terrible conflict. One of the most famous stanzas in all of the Poetic Edda is Völuspá stanza 44, describing the horrible situation among human societies. Bröður munu berjast og at bonum verða, munu systrungar sifjum spila, hart í heimi, hórdómur mikil, skegold, skólmold, skildir klofnir, vindold, vargold, Óður verð staupisk mun engi maður, óðrum firma. Brothers will fight one another and kill one another. Cousins will break peace with one another. The world will be a hard place to live in. It will be an age of adultery, an age of the axe, an age of the sword, an age of storms, an age of wolves. Shields will be cloven. Before the world sinks in the sea, there will be no man left who is true to another. Now all the gods and giants will face off against one another on a particular valley that's given different names in different sources. The poem Vafþrúð the Small calls it Vigriðr. Another poem in the Poetic Edda, Fólfni Small, briefly alludes to it as Óskopnir, and then the Saga of the Volsungs calls it Óska, but at any rate, some particular valley is designated as the battle site. Now there will be a couple of particular face-offs. The god Freyr will face the giant Surtr, who will carry a sword of fire. Freyr himself, Snorri tells us, will be unarmed because he gave up his sword to his messenger Skirnir as a reward for courting his bride. This story is told in the Poetic Edda in the poem For Skirnis. And Surtr will kill Freyr with the flaming sword. Then the Midgardormr, or Jormungandr, the giant serpent that encircles the earth, will face down Thor. Thor will kill it with his hammer, but Thor will take only 9 more steps after killing it before he falls dead from the poison that the serpent has blown onto him. And, of course, with our protector god Thor, humans will also die out. And now the king of the gods, Odin, comes to ride against Fenrir, the monstrous wolf who is the son of Loki and the giant woman Angrboda. Fenrir, according to Snorri, is so huge that his top jaw brushes the bowl of the sky, while his bottom jaw reaches all the way down to the dirt. And Odin, of course, will be splendidly arrayed, riding his horse Sleipnir with 8 legs, carrying his spear Gungnir that cannot miss. But, according to the poem Vafþrúð the Small, Odin will simply be swallowed. Völuspá doesn't specify how Odin is killed, but Vafþrúð the Small and Snorri and actually the poem Lokasenna all mention him simply being swallowed by the wolf's gaping jaws. But Odin is not dead for long before his son Vidar comes to avenge him, Vidar who has been born for this specific purpose. According to Völuspá, Vidar will simply stick a sword into the heart of Fenrir, but according to the poem Vafþrúð the Small, he will split the wolf's jaws. Snorri tells an even more specific story that seems to be somewhat based on what Vafthrudnismal says. He says that Vidar wears a special boot or shoe that is constructed of the bits of leather that are trimmed off of shoes by human beings. So just like you should keep your fingernails trimmed so that the giants don't have too much of a ship, you should keep your shoes trimmed so that Vidar can have a good strong shoe. With this shoe, he will step on the bottom jaw of Fenrir, and then apparently using his arms, he will rip open the jaws by pushing upwards. And this will kill the wolf Fenrir. Those three combats, Freyr versus Surtur, Thor versus the Midgard serpent, and Odin versus Fenrir, are mentioned in all of the sources. Loki and Heimdallr are also said to fight at the end, according to Snorri. This is interesting because, of course, Loki and Heimdallr have fought before. According to the very old skaldic poem Husdropa, they have fought in the form of seals, apparently over Freya's necklace Brisingamenn sometime in the past, although the complete story of that is lost. And Snorri also adds that Tyr, the one-armed, the one-handed god, will fight Garmr, the dog of hell. And then, once these combats are over, Surtur will burn all the worlds, including the great tree Yggdrasil. But according to Völuspá, the world will arise anew out of the sea after all of this, after the flame of Surtur has gone out. Vafthrudnismal mentions this time and again as when Surtalogi Sloknar, when the flame of Surtur goes out. And some of the gods will come back. Baldur, the innocent, beautiful god who was killed accidentally by his blind brother Holdr when he was tricked by Loki, will come back, as will Holdr, his killer. Vidar, the avenger of Odin, will come back, as will Voli, the avenger of Baldur. Hunir, the mysterious god who helped Odin create human beings at the very beginning, will come back in this new world, as will Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, who will inherit Mjolnir from him. And just like the gods did at the very beginning, according to Völuspá, these surviving gods will play with golden game pieces, presumably playing the game Hnefatafl. 2 human beings will survive. According to Vafthrudnismal, their names are Líf, life, and Lífthrasir, or something like pulsing with life. Líf is a neuter word, but Lífthrasir is masculine, so most editors have assumed that's the male member. They will survive somewhere called Hoddmimir's forest, no one knows who Hoddmimir is, eating morning dew, and perhaps also Odin's Einherjar, his chosen warriors in Valhall, will survive. There are hints both ways, kind of. This new world will be called Gimle, and it will be a beautiful place where wheat will grow without having to be sown, where waterfalls will flow, and wild animals will eat the plentiful fish in the rivers, which will also be available for human consumption. Some people have seen this as an indication that the myth of Ragnarok is cyclical, that maybe the world is created and ends several times, but we have to remember that that's an inference and not something that the Old Norse texts actually explicitly tell us. And I think that it's important that we keep in mind what we're explicitly told versus just what we infer. For the first-hand primary readings of this material, I recommend that you check out the Prose Edda and Poetic Edda. The best available translation of the Prose Edda is by Anthony Falks from Everyman Publishing, and my translation of the Poetic Edda, which renders these poems in contemporary English and dynamic style, is available from Hackett Publishing Company, together with my translation of the Saga of the Volsungs and the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, 2 of the most important sagas of Viking heroes. I hope these videos have been somewhat useful and informative for you. If you enjoy them, I hope that you'll check out my Patreon page, where you can help me continue to make them with support as little as $1 a month and receive cool random rewards as I think about them, like extra translations. For now, from always beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.